My name is Emily Carter, and I'm from Ohio, USA. For most of my life, I believed that parents loved all their children equally. I was wrong. Sometimes parents don't stop loving you. Sometimes they simply stop seeing you. And the most painful part isn't being forgotten by strangers. It's being forgotten by the people whose house you grew up in. I was 32 years old when I finally realized that my parents had never really considered me their daughter in the same way they considered my younger sister, Madison. Madison was the beautiful one, the confident one, the daughter who could walk into a room and somehow make everyone turn toward her. I was different. I was quiet. I worked hard. I didn't ask for much, and perhaps that was my biggest mistake. Because when you're the child who never asks for anything, people eventually assume you don't need anything. Before I tell you how my family discovered the truth about who had actually been supporting them, I want to ask you for one small favor. If stories about family, forgiveness, sacrifice, and second chances mean something to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And stay until the end, because the final conversation between my father and me changed the way I understood my entire childhood. It started with a phone call. I was sitting in my small apartment in Columbus on a cold Tuesday evening when my phone rang. It was my mother. "Emily," she said. Her voice sounded tired. "What happened, Mom?" There was a long silence. Then she said, "Your father lost his job." I immediately sat up. "What? When?" "About 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks? Yes. I could hear something trembling in her voice. "Why didn't you tell me?" Another silence. Then came the sentence that hurt more than the news itself. "We didn't want to bother you." I closed my eyes. My parents had always said that. "We don't want to bother you." But somehow, they never had that problem when Madison needed something. "Do you have enough money for the mortgage?" I asked. "We're managing." I knew what managing meant. My father was 61. He had worked at the same manufacturing company for almost 30 years. Losing his job wasn't just losing a paycheck. It was losing the identity he had built his entire adult life around. "Mom," I said gently, "I'll help." "No, Emily, please. We'll figure it out." "Mom, I'm serious." She finally whispered, "Your sister already offered to help." I froze. "Madison?" "Yes, of course, Madison." My sister had moved to New York 5 years earlier. She worked in marketing, lived in a beautiful apartment, traveled often, and posted pictures that made her life look perfect. Whenever she came home, Mom cooked her favorite meals. Dad took her shopping. They listened to every story she told. When I came home, my parents usually asked, "How's work?" Then they changed the subject. "Still," I said, "that's good, Mom. If Madison can help, that's wonderful." My mother hesitated. Then she said, "She offered to pay 3 months of the mortgage." I smiled even though she couldn't see me. "That's generous." "Yes, but if you need anything else, call me." "We won't." "Promise?" "Promise." We hung up. I stared at my phone. Something didn't feel right. Not because Madison had offered to help, but because my mother sounded relieved, as if she had finally received help from the daughter they had always trusted. I didn't think much more about it that night. 2 weeks later, I drove to my parents' house. The house looked exactly as it had when I was a child. White wooden fence, small garden, the old maple tree in the front yard, even the porch swing was still there. When I knocked, Mom opened the door. She hugged me, but it wasn't the warm hug I remembered from childhood. It was quick, almost formal. "Come in." Dad was sitting in the living room. He looked older, much older. "Dad," he smiled. "Hey, kiddo." That nickname had once meant everything to me. I sat beside him. "How are you doing?" "Fine. Mom told me about the job." He looked away. "We'll survive. You don't have to be embarrassed." "I'm not embarrassed. You can talk to me." He looked at me. For a moment, his eyes softened. Then Mom entered the room holding a stack of papers. "We need to talk about something." I immediately became nervous. "What?" She placed the papers on the table. "These are the mortgage statements." I looked at them. There were several late payment notices. My stomach tightened. "Mom, we're behind." "How far?" She didn't answer. Dad finally said, "Almost $6,000. I stared at him. "6,000? He nodded. I immediately reached for my purse. I can transfer some money tonight. No, Dad's answer was firm. I don't want your money. Dad, this isn't about pride. I said no. I looked at Mom. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Then my mother whispered, Madison is coming this weekend. I nodded. Okay. She wants to discuss something with us. What kind of something? My mother finally looked at me. She thinks we should sell the house. My heart dropped. No, Dad looked at me. It's an option. This is your home. We can't afford it. You can rent somewhere smaller. We've lived here for 30 years. Exactly, my voice cracked. This is where we grew up. Dad sighed. Things change. I looked around the room. The family photographs were still on the wall. There was one of Madison graduating college, one of Madison at her wedding, one of Madison holding her first promotion award. I looked for a photograph of myself. There were 3, one from high school, one from college, and one from my graduation. All of mine were pushed toward the corner. I didn't say anything. That night I slept in my childhood bedroom. I couldn't sleep. Around 1:30 in the morning, I heard voices downstairs. Mom, Dad, and Madison. I slowly opened my bedroom door. Madison had arrived earlier than expected. I walked toward the stairs. Then I heard her say, Mom, Dad, you can't keep depending on Emily. I stopped. My mother answered. She offered. And that's exactly the problem. What do you mean? Madison sighed. She doesn't understand how money works. I stood completely still. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She'll give you whatever little money she has, Madison continued, and then she'll expect you to feel guilty. My father said, that's enough. Madison became quiet. Then she said something I'll never forget. I'm the only one who can actually save this family. I felt something break inside me, not because she thought she was better than me, but because my parents didn't correct her. No one said, Emily has always been there for us. No one defended me. Instead, Mom whispered, maybe you're right. I quietly walked back upstairs. I sat on my bed. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question I had been afraid to ask for years. What if my family had never really needed Madison's money? What if they had simply never realized how much I had already given? I didn't know it yet. But within a few weeks, my parents would discover exactly who had been keeping their family together. And the truth would change everything. The next morning, I woke up before everyone else. I packed my bag quietly. Before leaving, I went downstairs. Dad was sitting alone at the kitchen table. Leaving already? Yes. He looked disappointed. You don't have to rush. I have work. He nodded. I hesitated. Dad? Yes. Do you really think Madison is the only one who can help? He stared at me. No. Then why didn't you say anything last night? He looked down at his coffee. I don't know. That answer hurt. More than anger would have. I drove back to Columbus. On the way home, memories kept coming back. When I was 22, I had moved out of my parents' house. My salary was small. My apartment was tiny. But I always sent money home, not because they demanded it, because I knew they were struggling. When Dad's truck needed repairs, I paid $900. When Mom needed dental work, I paid $1,400. When their water heater broke, I covered the replacement. When the roof leaked, I sent $2,300. I never announced any of it. I never posted about it. I never told Madison. I didn't want praise. I just wanted my parents to be okay. There was another thing they didn't know. For the past 11 months, I had been quietly paying $850 every month toward their mortgage. I had discovered that Dad's overtime had stopped and Mom's hours at the school cafeteria had been reduced. They were already struggling, so I created an automatic payment. Every month, same day, same amount. I never told them. Why? Because I knew my father would refuse. He was proud. And because I didn't want him to feel like he had failed. But now I wondered whether hiding my help had been a mistake. 3 days later, my mother called. Emily? Yes. Your father wants to talk to you. My heart tightened. Okay. Dad came on the phone. Your mother says you're upset. I'm not upset. You're lying. I smiled sadly. Maybe a little. There was silence. Then Dad said, I shouldn't have let Madison talk that way. I didn't answer. She was stressed. I understand. Emily, yes. You've always been different. I almost laughed. Different how? You never ask for anything. I looked out my apartment window. Maybe that's why nobody notices when I need something. Dad became silent. Then he said, "You matter to me." Those words should have comforted me. Instead, they made me cry, because I had spent years wondering if they were true. Thanks, Dad. We ended the call. A week passed. Then everything changed. I received a call from the mortgage company. At first, I thought it was a mistake. The representative said, "Miss Carter, we're calling regarding the mortgage on your parents' property." I immediately became confused. Yes, we wanted to confirm the payment arrangement. What payment arrangement? She explained that several payments had been made from an account linked to mine. I froze. "I'm sorry," she repeated the details. My heart started pounding. Then I realized something. My automatic payments had been covering their mortgage. But apparently, my parents had recently contacted the bank about a hardship arrangement. The bank representative asked, "Would you like us to continue the automatic payments?" I said yes. Then I stopped. "Actually, can you tell me how much remains?" She gave me the number. I nearly dropped my phone. After years of payments, the balance was far lower than I expected. I sat quietly. Then I realized something else. If my parents sold the house now, they would lose the home they had spent 30 years building. And Madison was pushing them toward selling it. That evening, I drove back to my parents' house. When I arrived, Madison was there. She was sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere. "Emily," she said. "Madison," she smiled. "You should have called." "Why? We're discussing the house." I looked at Mom and Dad. Dad looked uncomfortable. Madison pointed to a document. "I found a buyer." My heart stopped. "You already found a buyer?" "He's willing to close quickly." "How quickly?" 30 days. I looked at Dad. "Do you want to sell?" He didn't answer. Mom whispered, "We don't have much choice." I looked at the papers. Then I said quietly, "Yes, you do." Madison rolled her eyes. "Emily, please don't make this emotional." "It's not emotional. You always do this." "Do what?" "Act like you're the victim." I stared at her. "I never said that." "You don't have to," Mom interrupted. "Girls, please." But Madison wasn't finished. "You can't save them, Emily." I looked at my parents. Then I said, "Maybe I already have." Everyone became silent. Madison laughed. "What does that mean?" I reached into my purse. I pulled out my bank statements. I placed them on the table. "This." Madison looked confused. Dad picked up the papers. His face changed. Mom leaned closer. I said, "For the last 11 months, I've been paying $850 a month toward the mortgage." My mother's hand went to her mouth. Dad stared at me. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd refuse." Dad's eyes filled with tears. Madison slowly stood up. "You've been paying their mortgage?" I nodded. "And the roof?" I placed another statement on the table. "And the water heater?" Another. "And Mom's dental work?" Another. Nobody spoke. Madison's face had lost its confidence, but I wasn't finished. "There is something else." I looked at my parents. "I didn't do any of this because I wanted to prove I was better than Madison." I took a breath. "I did it because you're my parents." Dad started crying. And for the first time in my life, I realized something. The daughter everyone thought needed less had been giving more than anyone knew. Madison walked out. The door slammed behind her. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Dad kept looking at the bank statements. Finally, he whispered, "Why didn't you tell us?" I smiled through my tears. "Because you would have said no? You should have told me." "I know." Mom reached for my hand. "I'm sorry." Those 2 words were small, but they carried years of pain. I squeezed her hand. "I don't want you to feel guilty." "We should." "Mom, no." She shook her head. "We should." Then she looked toward the door Madison had walked through. "We were so proud of her." I didn't respond. Dad whispered, "We thought she was the one who had everything together." I looked down. Sometimes the person who looks like they have everything is just better at hiding what they don't. The next morning, Madison called me. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "What?" Her voice was different, not confident, not angry, scared. "Emily, can we talk?" "About what?" "Everything." We met at a small coffee shop. Madison arrived 10 minutes late. She looked exhausted. She sat across from me. I didn't know. I know. No, you don't. She rubbed her forehead. I really didn't know. Know what? That you were helping them. I stayed quiet. She looked at me. Why didn't you tell me? I almost laughed. You never asked. She looked away, then she whispered, I thought you didn't care. That sentence surprised me. What? You were always so independent. I had to be. Madison looked at her coffee. When we were kids, Mom and Dad always compared us. I stared at her. She continued. They said I was going to be successful. I swallowed. They told me you were the responsible one. I shook my head. I never heard that. They did. Then why did they treat you like you were the favorite? She didn't answer immediately. Finally she said, because I acted like I needed them. I looked at her. She began crying. I was scared. Of what? Of failing. I realized something in that moment. My sister wasn't the villain I had imagined. She was another daughter carrying a different kind of pain. She had spent her entire life trying to prove she was special. I had spent mine trying to prove I wasn't a burden. We were both children who had learned different ways to survive the same family. Madison wiped her tears. I shouldn't have said what I said that night. No, I was angry. I know, but I meant one thing. What? I want to help them. I looked at her. I believe you. She reached into her bag. I brought this. It was a check for $10,000. What's this? My savings. I pushed it back. I don't need it. It isn't for you. She looked at me. It's for Mom and Dad. I hesitated. Then I said, then we'll do it together. She nodded. That was the first time in our entire adult lives that Madison and I worked together, not against each other, for our parents. But the biggest surprise was still coming. That evening, Dad called. Emily? Yes. You need to come over. Why? I found something. What? Your mother found an old box. My heart started beating faster. What kind of box? I don't know. What's inside? Dad's voice became quiet. Letters. I drove to my parents' house that night. The old box was sitting on the dining room table. It was dusty, brown, held together with a piece of faded string. Mom sat beside it. Dad stood behind her. Madison was there too. Dad opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Some were mine. Some belonged to Madison. Others were written by my parents. I picked up the first letter. It was addressed to me. The date was 20 years earlier. I opened it. It was from my father. I read the first few lines. My hands began shaking. Dad said, I wrote that after you left for college. I looked at him. Why didn't you give it to me? I was embarrassed. About what? He sat down. About how scared I was. I read the letter. My father had written that he was afraid he wasn't giving me enough. He wrote that Madison seemed confident, while I seemed determined to handle everything alone. He wrote that he worried I would eventually stop needing them. I looked at him. That happened. His eyes filled with tears. I know. Then Mom opened another envelope. Inside was a letter I had written when I was 17. I didn't remember writing it, but I remembered the feeling. I had written, I wish sometimes that Mom and Dad would notice me without me having to achieve something first. I couldn't breathe. Mom covered her mouth. I never saw this. You found it. It was in your old school box. I looked at her. You kept it? Yes. Then why didn't you ever talk to me? She cried. Because I didn't know how. Silence filled the room. Then Madison picked up another letter. She read it. Her face changed. What? She looked at me. This is from Mom. To me? No. She handed it to Dad. Dad read it. Then he closed his eyes. What does it say? He finally answered. It says your mother was worried about Madison. I looked at Mom. She nodded. She had anxiety about failing. Madison looked shocked. You knew. I knew you were struggling. But you always made it seem like I was doing better than Emily. Mom began crying. I was trying to protect you. I whispered, and who was protecting me? Mom looked at me. Nobody answered. That was the hardest moment, because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives quietly, and it hurts more that way. Then Dad stood up. There is one more thing. He walked to the cabinet. He pulled out a folder. This was supposed to be yours. He handed it to me. I opened it. Inside was the deed to the house, and a handwritten note, my father's handwriting. He had written, "This house belongs to both our daughters." I looked at him. "When did you write this?" "Years ago." "Then why were you going to sell it?" He looked ashamed. "Because I forgot what mattered." I started crying. Dad came closer. "I thought protecting Madison meant choosing her." He paused, but I was wrong. Madison began crying too. Mom reached for both of us. For the first time in years, all four of us stood together, not as the perfect family, not as the family we pretended to be, but as four imperfect people finally telling the truth. Then Dad said, "We're not selling the house." I looked at him. "What?" "We'll find another way." Madison wiped her tears. "I'll help." I nodded. "I'll help too." Dad smiled. "No," we looked at him. "This time we're all helping each other." The following months were difficult. There was no magical solution, no sudden lottery, no stranger arriving with a suitcase full of money. Real life doesn't work that way. We had bills, we had debt, we had difficult conversations. But something changed. We stopped hiding. Dad found part-time work at a local hardware store. It wasn't the career he once had, but he came home tired and proud. Mom started selling homemade pies at the weekend farmers market. Madison created a small online store for her baking, and I helped them organize their finances. For the first time, everyone knew what everyone was carrying. One Saturday morning, Madison came to my apartment. She brought 2 coffees. "I have something to tell you." "What?" "I quit my job." I stared at her. "Why?" "I didn't quit without a plan." She smiled. "I started working for myself." I smiled. "That's brave." She laughed. "You always say things like that." "What?" "You make everything sound simple." I looked at her. "It isn't simple." She nodded. "I know." Then she said, "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "All those years," she paused, "I was jealous of you." I laughed softly. "Really?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you seemed free." I shook my head. "I wasn't free." "I know that now." She looked down. "You could walk away from people." I smiled sadly. "I just learned not to chase people who didn't choose me." She looked at me. "Did you ever hate me?" I thought for a moment. "Yes." She nodded. "I deserved that. But I don't anymore." She smiled. That afternoon, we drove to our parents' house. Dad had prepared dinner. Mom had baked a pie. We sat around the table. For once, nobody talked about money. Nobody talked about success. Nobody compared us. We just talked. Dad told a terrible joke. Mom laughed. Madison rolled her eyes. I laughed so hard I almost cried. And then Dad looked at me. "Emily?" "Yes." "Thank you." I knew what he meant. But I also knew there was something I needed to say. "Dad, I don't want you to thank me for loving you." He looked at me. "I just want you to remember that love doesn't always look impressive." I continued. "Sometimes love is a $20 grocery bill. Sometimes it's driving 2 hours in the rain. Sometimes it's fixing a leaking roof. Sometimes it's simply answering the phone." I looked around the table. "And sometimes love is realizing you've hurt someone and choosing to change." Nobody spoke. Mom reached across the table and held my hand. "I should have chosen you more often." I squeezed her hand. "You're choosing me now?" She nodded. "Yes." Madison reached for my other hand. "And I'm choosing you too." We laughed. The family that had once been divided by comparison was finally learning something much simpler. There was no winner. There had never needed to be one. A year later, my parents were still living in the same house. The mortgage was under control. Dad had found steady part-time work. Mom's little baking business had grown. Madison's online store was doing well, and I had stopped secretly paying their bills. Not because I stopped caring, but because they no longer needed me to carry everything alone. One Sunday afternoon, my parents hosted a family barbecue. There were neighbors, friends, relatives. Everyone was laughing in the backyard. At one point, my father stood up. He tapped his glass. "Everyone, can I have your attention?" The conversation stopped. Dad looked at Mom, then Madison, then me. "I've made a lot of mistakes as a father." Nobody moved. "I thought providing money was enough." He looked at me. I thought if one child looked successful, that meant I was successful. His voice cracked. But I learned something. He took a breath. The child who doesn't ask for help may be the one who needs to hear, "I'm proud of you," the most. I started crying. Dad continued. For years, we thought Madison was the one carrying us. Madison smiled sadly. She helped us. Then Dad looked at me, but Emily had been carrying us quietly. The backyard became silent. Dad raised his glass. To my daughters. Madison stood beside him. And to second chances. Everyone applauded. But I wasn't thinking about applause. I was thinking about the girl I had once been. The 17-year-old girl who had written, "I wish they would notice me. I wish I could go back and sit beside her. I wish I could tell her, they will. Maybe not when you want them to. Maybe not in the way you imagined. But one day, the people who truly love you will see the things you did quietly. And even if they don't, your worth doesn't disappear. Because your value was never determined by how much attention your family gave your sister. You were valuable before they noticed. You were worthy before they understood. You mattered before anyone thanked you. That evening, as the sun went down, my mother came outside. She sat beside me. "Are you happy?" I smiled. "For the first time, I think I am." She leaned against my shoulder. "I wish I could change the past." I looked at her. "You can't." "I know, but you can change what happens next." She smiled. Then she asked, "Do you forgive me?" I looked toward the house. I saw Dad laughing with Madison. I saw the lights glowing through the windows, and I finally understood something. Forgiveness isn't saying that what happened didn't hurt. It means you refuse to let yesterday control tomorrow. "Yes, Mom," I said. "I forgive you." She cried. I hugged her, and for the first time, it didn't feel like I was trying to earn my place in my family. I finally knew I already had one. Not because I was the most successful. Not because I paid the most bills. Not because I sacrificed the most. But because I was their daughter. And sometimes, the person standing quietly in the background is the one holding the whole family together. So if you're listening to my story, and you've ever felt like your parents chose someone else over you, please remember this. Being overlooked doesn't mean you're unimportant. Sometimes people don't recognize your value until life forces them to look closely. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't making the people who hurt you regret what they did. Sometimes the greatest victory is becoming the person who no longer needs their approval. I didn't win against my sister. I didn't defeat my parents. I simply found my own place in the family, and eventually they found it too. The daughter they overlooked was never the one who needed to prove her worth. She was the one who had been quietly proving it all along.